The certified letter sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I knew what it contained, the formal end to my relationship with my grandchildren. When I finally summoned the courage to break the seal, the legal language cut deeper than any knife could. Nancy Wilson is hereby ordered to cease all contact with minors Emma and Noah Parker. My daughter-in-law Melissa had done it. She'd actually gone through with her threat to legally bar me from seeing the two little people who had become the center of my world. What she didn't realize was that while she could control my physical access to my grandchildren, she couldn't touch the financial legacy I'd been quietly building for them since the day they were born. A legacy that would ultimately bridge the chasm between us in ways none of us could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I first met Melissa 12 years ago when my son Christopher brought her home for Thanksgiving dinner. She was everything I'd hoped for in a partner for him. Brilliant, ambitious, with a quiet confidence that balanced Christopher's more impulsive nature. As the only child of a single mother, I'd always been protective of Christopher, perhaps too much so. His father had walked out when he was just 3 years old, leaving me to raise him alone while working full-time as an elementary school librarian. Melissa came from a very different background. Her parents were both successful attorneys who had mapped out her life since childhood. Prestigious university, law school, career at a top firm. She'd followed that path perfectly until meeting Christopher during her final year of law school, when he was managing a popular cafe near campus. Their connection was immediate and unexpected, especially to Melissa's parents, who made no secret of their disappointment in her choice. Robert and Diana Thompson had envisioned their daughter with someone from their social circle, not a college dropout turned cafe manager whose mother worked in a school library. Despite her parents' reservations, Melissa and Christopher married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. I still remember how radiant she looked that day, how happy they both seemed. I tried my best to welcome her into our little family, to be the mother-in-law I never had. I made space for her traditions alongside ours, asked about her work, respected their boundaries as a newly married couple. For a while, everything was harmonious. Emma arrived 2 years later, a colicky baby, with her mother's dark curls and her father's inquisitive eyes. I offered to help, remembering the exhaustion of new motherhood, but Melissa preferred to manage on her own, or rely on her mother, who had suddenly become very involved despite her initial disapproval of the marriage. I tried not to feel hurt. When Diana was called for overnight help while I received polite declines to my offers of assistance. "Mom, Melissa just feels more comfortable with her mother right now," Christopher explained gently when I expressed my confusion. It's not personal. But it felt personal, especially when Noah was born 3 years later and the pattern continued. While Diana was integrated into their daily lives, picking Emma up from preschool, taking the children for weekends, my role became increasingly peripheral. Structured Sunday afternoon visits, occasional dinners where I felt more like a guest than family. Still, I cherished every moment with my grandchildren. Emma with her passionate interest in insects and space, Noah with his gentle nature and talent for drawing. During my limited time with them, I focused entirely on their interests. We built bug habitats in mason jars, watched meteor showers from my backyard, created elaborate comic books featuring Noah's superhero creations. In those precious hours, the tension with Melissa faded to background noise. The real trouble began when Christopher's cafe expanded into a small chain across the city. Suddenly, he was working 70-hour weeks, leaving Melissa to balance her demanding legal career with increasing childcare responsibilities. The stress took a toll on their marriage, and by extension, on my relationship with them all. "Nancy, we've talked about this," Melissa said tensely one Sunday when I brought the children home 30 minutes late from our outing. "We have a schedule. For a reason. Emma has homework, Noah needs his bath routine. When you disregard our timeline, it throws off the entire evening." "I'm sorry," We lost track of time at the Science Museum, I explained, watching Emma's face fall as she clutched the astronaut pin I'd bought her. Emma was so engaged with the space exhibit and you could have texted, Melissa interrupted, ushering the children inside. Christopher and I are trying to maintain structure in their lives despite his crazy work schedule. We need you to respect that. These small frictions accumulated over months. Melissa objected to the snacks I provided, too much sugar. The gifts I purchased, too extravagant, not clearing them first. The activities I planned, too stimulating right before bedtime. Each criticism felt like an indictment of my grandmother abilities, each restriction another barrier between me and the children I adored. Perhaps I should have been more understanding of the pressure Melissa was under, balancing partnership at her law firm with motherhood, while her husband worked endlessly on his business expansion. Perhaps I should have recognized the control she exerted over the children's lives as her way of creating stability amid chaos. Instead, I grew resentful, interpreting her boundaries as personal rejections. The breaking point came during a rare family dinner at their home. Christopher had finally taken a night off, and Melissa had prepared an elaborate meal. Everything felt tense. Christopher checking his phone constantly, Melissa watching him with thinly veiled irritation, the children unusually quiet. When Noah accidentally spilled his juice, Melissa's reaction seemed disproportionate. Sharp words, tears from Noah, Christopher remaining silent. "It's just juice," I said softly, helping Noah clean up. "Accidents happen, sweetheart." The look Melissa gave me could have frozen fire. After the children were in bed, she confronted me in the kitchen where I was washing dishes. "I need you to stop undermining my parenting," she said, voice tight with controlled anger. "When you contradict me in front of the children, it makes discipline impossible." "I wasn't contradicting you," I protested. "I was just comforting Noah. He looked so upset." "Because actions have consequences in our home," she interrupted. "When he's careless, there are natural consequences. He needs to learn that." "He's 6 years old, Melissa. Children make mistakes." "Exactly. And they learn from them when we don't rush in to smooth everything over." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "This is exactly why we need clearer boundaries. You have a completely different parenting philosophy which you're entitled to, but not with my children." The phrase "my children" landed like a slap. Not our children, or even Christopher's and my children. Just my children, as if my son, and by extension me, were somehow secondary. That night, I made a terrible mistake. Hurt and angry, I called my closest friend Judith and vented every frustration I'd been harboring about Melissa. Her controlling nature, her rigid rules, how she was pushing Christopher away with her perfectionism, how the children seemed to walk on eggshells in their own home. What I didn't know was that Judith's daughter had recently started working at Melissa's law firm. My private complaints became office gossip, which eventually made its way back to Melissa. The fallout was swift and severe. Christopher called the next day, his voice uncharacteristically cold. "Mom, we need some space. Melissa is extremely upset about things you've been saying about her, about our family." "Christopher, whatever you heard, I don't want to discuss it right now. We think it's best if we take a break from visits for a while." That while stretched into weeks, then months. My calls went to voicemail. My texts received brief, non-committal responses. I sent cards to the children that received no acknowledgement. After 3 months of this painful limbo, the certified letter arrived from Peterson Family Law, the formal cease and desist that now sat opened on my kitchen counter. I read it again through tears. Unauthorized contact would result in legal action. All communication must go through their attorney. The children's well-being required this necessary boundary. As if I were some threat to them rather than the grandmother who had loved them since before they drew their first breaths. That night, alone in my quiet house filled with photos of grandchildren I was forbidden to see, I pulled out the investment statements from my desk drawer. Since each child's birth, I had been depositing $300 monthly into 529 college savings plans for them. Nearly $50,000 for Emma and $30,000 for Noah, growing steadily with compound interest. I'd never told Christopher or Melissa about these accounts. Like many teachers, I had seen too many bright students limited by financial constraints. I wanted to ensure my grandchildren would never face those barriers. Looking at those statements, watching the numbers blur through my tears, I realized something important. Though Melissa could legally keep me from seeing Emma and Noah, she couldn't erase the tangible proof of my love for them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These accounts represented years of consistent care, months of extra tutoring sessions I'd taken on to afford the contributions, hundreds of small sacrifices made gladly for their future. But the money itself wasn't enough. If I wanted to be part of my grandchildren's lives, to watch Emma's fascination with science blossom into a career, to see Noah's artistic talents develop, I needed to find a way to repair what had been broken. Not through legal battles or financial leverage, but through understanding and growth. As I put the statements away, I made two decisions that would ultimately change everything. First, I would seek professional help to understand my role in this conflict. Second, I would find a way to communicate with Melissa directly, woman to woman, mother to mother, beyond the legal barriers and family dynamics that had brought us to this breaking point. I didn't know then that the path forward would require more humility than I thought possible, more self-examination than I'd ever undertaken, and ultimately, a complete reimagining of my role as a grandmother. I couldn't have predicted that those college funds, started with such simple, loving intentions, would eventually become not just financial security for my grandchildren, but the unexpected bridge that would help our fractured family find its way back to wholeness. The next morning, I made an appointment with Dr. Rachel Sorensen, a family therapist whose name I'd heard mentioned at the library where I still volunteered twice a week. Her office was a converted Victorian house with wide windows that flooded the space with natural light. I sat nervously in the waiting room, wondering if I was making a mistake. What could therapy possibly offer that would change Melissa's mind about me? "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Sorensen greeted me, extending her hand. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a calm presence. "Please, come in." For the first hour, I poured out my story, my relationship with Christopher, Melissa's entry into our lives, the grandchildren I adored, and the gradual deterioration that had led to the cease and desist letter. Dr. Sorensen listened, attentively, occasionally asking questions that probed areas I hadn't considered. "Why do you think Melissa reacted so strongly to your comforting Noah after he spilled his juice?" she asked. "She's a perfectionist," I replied automatically. "She can't stand when things go wrong. The poor children can't even make normal childhood mistakes without her overreacting." Dr. Sorensen nodded thoughtfully. "I notice when you describe Melissa's parenting, you often characterize it as rigid or controlling. I'm wondering if you've considered how your interventions might feel from her perspective?" "I'm just being a normal grandmother," I defended myself. "Grandmothers are supposed to be a soft place to land. That's our role." "Is it possible that what you see as normal grandmother behavior, Melissa experiences as undermining her authority?" I started to protest, but Dr. Sorensen continued gently. "When you told Noah it's just juice, after Melissa had already responded to the situation, you were essentially sending him the message that his mother's reaction was inappropriate." I felt a flicker of discomfort. That wasn't my intention. "Intentions and impact often differ, especially in family dynamics," she observed. "For our next session, I'd like you to try something. Would you be willing to write down some interactions where you and Melissa have clashed, but try to imagine them from her perspective?" I agreed, though skeptically. How could putting myself in Melissa's shoes possibly help when she was the one who had taken such extreme measures against me? That evening at home, I reluctantly pulled out a notepad and began the exercise Dr. Sorensen had suggested. I wrote about the juice incident, trying to see it through Melissa's eyes. If I were a working mother, trying to maintain order while my husband was constantly absent, struggling to uphold consistent discipline, and then my mother-in-law contradicted me in front of the children. I felt an uncomfortable twinge of recognition. I wrote about the time I'd brought the children home late from the science museum. From my perspective, I'd been fostering Emma's intellectual curiosity. From Melissa's, I'd disrupted the family schedule and ignored clear boundaries. I wrote about the birthday gifts Melissa had deemed too extravagant, the activities she'd found too stimulating, the snacks she'd objected to. With each scenario, I forced myself to consider, what might Melissa have been feeling? What pressures? Was she under? What was she trying to achieve with her rules and structure? The exercise was more difficult and revealing than I'd anticipated. When I returned to Dr. Sorensen's office the following week, I had 3 pages of notes. I think I'm starting to understand, I admitted. Melissa isn't just being controlling for the sake of it. She's trying to create stability for the children. That's an important insight, Dr. Sorensen said. And what about your role in these conflicts? I sighed, confronting the uncomfortable truth I'd been avoiding. I've been undermining her authority, even if I didn't mean to. Every time I contradict her rules or dismiss her concerns, I'm sending the message that I don't respect her as a mother. And how might that make her feel? Defensive, angry, maybe even threatened. I looked down at my hands. I never wanted her to feel that way. Over the next several sessions, Dr. Sorensen helped me explore deeper patterns in my relationship with Melissa. I realized I'd never fully processed my feelings about Christopher choosing a partner from such a different background. Part of me had feared losing him to Melissa's world, the prestigious law firm, her affluent parents, the social circle I could never be part of. Instead of acknowledging that fear, I'd focused on ways Melissa fell short as a mother, unconsciously, trying to preserve my own importance in Christopher's life. You mentioned that Melissa's mother, Diana, becomes more involved after initially disapproving of the marriage, Dr. Sorensen noted during one session. How did that affect you? I felt replaced, I admitted, the truth painful to voice. I raised Christopher alone, made all the sacrifices, and then suddenly Diana swoops in and becomes the preferred grandmother. That must have been very painful. It was. I blinked back tears. When Diana stays overnight to help with the children, but my offers are politely declined, it feels like I'm being told I'm not good enough. That the librarian who struggled to make ends meet isn't as valuable as the attorney with the fancy house. Have you ever shared these feelings with Christopher or Melissa? I shook my head. I didn't want to seem petty or jealous, so instead, I focused on being the fun grandmother to compete with Diana. I ignored Melissa's rules about snacks and bedtimes because being the stricter grandmother wouldn't win me any points with the children. Dr. Sorensen nodded. So you were caught in a competition you felt you couldn't win on equal terms? Exactly. And now I've lost access to my grandchildren entirely. After 6 weeks of therapy, I felt I had gained enough insight to take the next step. With Dr. Sorensen's guidance, I wrote a letter to Christopher and Melissa, not to defend myself or demand visitation rights, but to take genuine responsibility for my part in our conflict. I understand now how my actions, though well-intentioned, undermined your authority as parents, I wrote. When I disregarded your rules about snacks, bedtimes, or activities, I wasn't respecting the careful structure you've created for Emma and Noah. I see how that placed the children in an impossible position between us, and how it made you feel disrespected as their mother, Melissa. I am truly sorry. I acknowledged specific incidents, taking ownership of my behavior without excuses. I didn't mention the college funds. This wasn't about leveraging them for access. This was about genuine accountability. I concluded, I don't expect this letter to immediately repair the damage I've caused. I'm in therapy, working to understand my own patterns and how to be a supportive presence rather than a disruption. If you're ever willing to consider rebuilding our relationship, I would be open to whatever boundaries and conditions you feel necessary, including family therapy. In the meantime, please know that I respect your decision to protect your family, even though I miss the children deeply. I sent the letter through their attorney, as instructed in the cease and desist order. Weeks passed with no response. I continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Sorensen, focusing on building healthier patterns for the future, whether or not I ever regained access to my grandchildren. The work was painful but necessary, forcing me to confront aspects of myself I'd never examined. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, almost 2 months after I'd sent the letter, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Christopher standing on my porch, soaked from the rain, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Can we talk, Mom?" I ushered him inside, my heart racing. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared meals. Throughout his childhood, where I'd helped with his homework, where I'd now spent countless evenings alone missing my grandchildren. "Your letter?" he began awkwardly. "Melissa and I have been discussing it." I waited, not wanting to presume anything. "She was really surprised by it," he continued. "We both were. It wasn't what we expected." "What did you expect?" I asked softly. Christopher sighed. Defensiveness, accusations, more of the same patterns, not accountability. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself," I said. "I've come to understand how my behavior affected your family." He nodded, slowly. "Melissa's still hurt. The things you said about her to Judith. They got pretty twisted by the time they made it back to her. People at her firm were talking about how her mother-in-law thought she was an unfit parent." I winced. "I never said that. But I did vent inappropriately, and I take full responsibility for that breach of trust." Christopher seemed surprised by my response. "Mom, we're not blameless in this either. I should have addressed the issues directly instead of letting things deteriorate. And Melissa..." He hesitated. "She acknowledges that she's been under tremendous stress and may have been overly rigid at times." A small flicker of hope kindled within me. "Does this mean there's a possibility of rebuilding our relationship?" "Melissa is open to considering it, with certain conditions." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. She wrote these down. The list was detailed and specific. Any visits would initially be supervised by Christopher. I would respect all. Parenting decisions without comment. Discussions about parenting philosophy would happen in private, never in front of the children. Gifts would be approved in advance. Schedules would be strictly observed. And most significantly, we would participate in family therapy together. "These seem very reasonable," I said, reviewing the conditions. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Christopher looked relieved. "There's one more thing, Mom. Why didn't you ever tell us you were setting aside money for the kids' college?" I froze, unsure how he'd discovered the accounts. "How did you—" "The statements," he explained. "When we were going through the cease and desist process, the lawyer asked if you had any financial entanglements with the children. I remembered collecting your mail when you had that knee surgery last year. I saw the investment statements, but didn't think much of it then. It was only when the lawyer asked that I connected the dots." "I was going to tell you when they were older," I said. "It wasn't a secret exactly. I just wanted it to be a gift without strings or expectations." Christopher's expression softened. "Mom, do you know what that money means to us? Melissa and I are both stressed about college costs. With my business expansion and her partnership track, we're stretched thin. Those accounts represent security for Emma and Noah that we couldn't provide on our own right now." that's all I ever wanted, I said, tears welling in my eyes. For them to have opportunities, to know they were loved and provided for. Melissa was moved when she realized you'd been contributing all this time, even during periods when you barely saw the kids. Even after the cease and desist letter. He reached across the table and took my hand, the first physical contact we'd had in months. It showed her a side of you she hadn't considered before. The following weekend, I had my first supervised visit with Emma and Noah at a neutral location, a community park with a playground. Christopher stayed close, monitoring our interaction. The children were initially reserved, clearly confused by my absence and sudden reappearance in their lives. Grandma Nancy has been away for a while, Christopher explained gently. But she's missed you very much and has something she'd like to say to you. I knelt down to their level, my heart aching at how much they'd grown in just a few months. I'm so sorry I haven't been able to see you. Sometimes grown-ups need to take time to figure things out and learn how to get along better. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you or thinking about you. 7-year-old Emma studied me skeptically. Mommy said you and her were having disagreements. That's true, I acknowledged. Your mommy and I didn't always see eye to eye, and I didn't always listen as well as I should have. But we're both working on being better at talking and listening to each other. Noah, now 6, seemed less interested in explanations and more concerned with practical matters. Did you bring your bug kit? Can we catch butterflies today? I looked at Christopher, careful not to overstep. He nodded his permission. I did bring the bug kit, I confirmed. But let's make sure we release anything we catch before we go home, okay? That's one of the rules we need to follow. The visit was brief but significant. A first small step toward rebuilding trust. As I was leaving, Christopher mentioned that Melissa had agreed to join us for our first family therapy session the following week. Dr. Sorensen had recommended a colleague who specialized in family reconciliation, Dr. Alan Mendez. His office was furnished with comfortable couches arranged in a circle, creating an atmosphere of equality rather than confrontation. When Melissa entered, her posture stiff and her expression guarded, I felt a surge of nervousness. This was the first time we'd been face-to-face since the painful confrontation in her kitchen months ago. Dr. Mendez established ground rules for our session. Each person would have uninterrupted time to speak. We would use I statements rather than accusations. We would focus on moving forward rather than rehashing past grievances. Melissa agreed to speak first. I felt disrespected and undermined in my own home, she began, her voice controlled, but emotional. Every time you contradicted my parenting decisions or ignored our rules, it sent a message to the children that my authority wasn't valid. As someone who already struggles with balancing my career and motherhood, that was especially painful. She described feeling judged by me, sensing disapproval in my expressions or comments even when nothing explicit was said. She explained how the gossiping incident had humiliated her professionally, making her feel unsafe in her own workplace. I know the cease and desist letter seems extreme, she acknowledged, but I felt I had to protect my family from further damage. I needed clear boundaries that would be respected. When it was my turn to speak, I focused on validating her experience rather than defending myself. Thank you for sharing that, Melissa. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I never intended to undermine your authority, but I understand now that impact matters more than intention. I explained the insights I'd gained through therapy, my unprocessed feelings about Christopher marrying someone from a different background, my insecurity about Diana's role in the children's lives, my misguided attempts to be the fun grandmother, to secure their affection. None of that excuses my behavior, I concluded. You are an excellent mother who wants the best for your children. I should have supported your parenting instead of contradicting it. Christopher spoke last, acknowledging his role in the conflict by failing to address issues directly and often leaving Melissa to manage family dynamics alone while he focused on his business. "I avoided conflict," he admitted. "Instead of having difficult conversations, I let resentments build on both sides until the situation became unmanageable." By the end of that first session, we had established a tentative framework for moving forward. Weekly family therapy sessions, short supervised visits with the children that would gradually increase as trust was rebuilt, and a commitment to direct communication rather than triangulation through Christopher. Progress was slow and not without setbacks. During our third therapy session, Melissa revealed something that helped me understand her perspective more deeply. "My mother is extremely critical," she explained. "Nothing I do is ever good enough for her. She appears supportive to others, but privately picks apart my parenting, my career choices, even my appearance." I was stunned. Diana, with her perfect clothes and imposing presence, had always seemed the ideal mother. Confident, successful, deeply involved with her grandchildren. "When you started criticizing my parenting methods," Melissa continued, "it triggered all those same feelings of inadequacy I've struggled with my entire life. I felt like I was fighting against the same patterns all over again." This revelation transformed my understanding of our conflict. What I had interpreted as Melissa's rigidity was actually her attempt to parent differently than she had been parented, to create clear structures and expectations rather than the shifting standards and subtle criticisms she had grown up with. "I had no idea," I said softly. "I assumed Diana was the perfect mother-in-law because she seemed so involved with the children." "She's involved on her terms," Melissa replied. "She helps when it suits her image as the devoted grandmother, but always with strings attached. Every favor comes with commentary about how I should be managing my life better." Christopher nodded in confirmation. "It's true, Mom. Diana's assistance always comes with a side of criticism that Melissa doesn't share with others." In that moment, I realized how completely I had misread the family dynamics. I had been jealous of a relationship that was actually another source of stress for Melissa. My attempts to be the opposite of Diana, fun, permissive, indulgent, had only created additional pressure, pulling the children between two extremes. Over the following months, our therapy sessions continued to reveal layers of misunderstanding that had contributed to the conflict. I learned that Melissa's insistence on schedules and routines stemmed from her own childhood in a chaotic home, where her parents' demanding legal careers had often left her with unpredictable caretakers and constantly shifting expectations. Structure wasn't rigidity to her, it was safety. Christopher shared that he felt caught between his loyalty to me and his commitment to Melissa, often avoiding addressing issues directly because he feared losing one of us. Melissa acknowledged that stress from her partnership track had sometimes made her reactions disproportionate to the situation. And I continued to examine my own patterns, how my identity as Christopher's mother had become so central that I struggled to redefine my role when he created his own family, how my insecurities about my socioeconomic background compared to Melissa's family had colored my perceptions of her parenting. 6 months into our reconciliation process, we reached a significant milestone. Melissa invited me to dinner at their home, the first time I had been welcome there since the conflict began. The invitation came with clear parameters. I would respect their evening routine, support rather than contradict their parenting decisions, and leave at the agreed-upon time. I arrived with a small, pre-approved gift for each child, a constellation guide for Emma, and a new sketchbook for Noah. The evening wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, careful navigation around potentially sensitive topics, but it was genuine progress. As I helped clear the dinner dishes that evening, Melissa lingered in the kitchen after Christopher took the children upstairs for their bedtime routine. We worked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the gentle clink of plates and running water. "Thank you for respecting our boundaries tonight," she said finally, carefully placing a glass in the dishwasher. I know it wasn't easy. I'm learning, I replied simply. The children seem happy. Emma's vocabulary has expanded significantly. Melissa smiled slightly. She's reading everything she can get her hands on. The other day, she informed me that octopuses have 3 hearts and can change color to match their surroundings. That sounds like Emma, always collecting fascinating facts. Another brief silence fell between us, not entirely comfortable but no longer hostile. Christopher told me about the college funds, Melissa said, her voice quieter now. That you've been contributing since they were born. I focused on rinsing a plate, uncertain how to respond. It wasn't meant to be secretive. I just wanted to do something meaningful for their future. Even during the months when you couldn't see them, you kept contributing? I nodded. Of course. My love for them doesn't fluctuate based on circumstances. Neither does my commitment to their future. Melissa leaned against the counter, studying me with new consideration. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you tonight. Those accounts represent significant financial planning that affects our family. I think we should discuss how they fit into our overall approach to the children's education. I felt a momentary tension. Was she trying to take control of the funds I'd established? Before therapy, I might have become defensive, seeing her interest as another attempt to diminish my role. Now, I paused and considered her perspective. I'd be happy to discuss that, I said carefully. What did you have in mind? Christopher and I have been trying to save for their education too, but with the business expansion and my firm's partnership track requirements, we haven't been able to contribute as much as we'd like. She hesitated. I'm wondering if it might make sense to coordinate our efforts rather than having separate accounts. You mean combine the funds? Not necessarily, but perhaps align our investment strategies. Maybe meet with a financial advisor together to ensure we're maximizing growth potential. The suggestion surprised me. Rather than attempting to exclude me from financial planning for the children, she was suggesting a collaborative approach. It was the first time she had explicitly invited my participation in any aspect of the children's future. I think that's an excellent idea, I said, feeling a warmth of hope. I've been working with Marcus Chen at River City Financial for the accounts. He's very knowledgeable about education planning. I know Marcus, Melissa said, looking surprised. He handles some investments for clients at our firm. He has an excellent reputation. This small point of connection that we both respected, the same financial advisor, seemed insignificant on the surface. Yet it represented something important, a recognition that despite our different backgrounds and approaches, we shared common values and concerns for the children's future. Would you be comfortable meeting with him together? I asked. You, Christopher, and me? Melissa considered this, then nodded. Yes, I think that would be constructive. I'll check our calendar and see when we might be available. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how significant this small exchange had been. The college funds, which I had established as private acts of love and commitment, were becoming bridges between us rather than secret gestures. By acknowledging them openly and inviting my partnership in planning, Melissa had taken a meaningful step toward genuine reconciliation. 2 weeks later, we met with Marcus Chen in his downtown office. The meeting could have been tense, with underlying power dynamics about control of the funds and decision-making authority. Instead, it became an opportunity for mutual respect and collaborative planning. Mrs. Wilson has established an excellent foundation, Marcus explained, reviewing the account statements. The consistent monthly contributions combined with the aggressive but thoughtful investment strategy have resulted in significant growth, particularly for Emma's account, which has had more time in the market. I could see Christopher and Melissa were impressed by the detailed attention I'd given these accounts over the years. Marcus explained the investment allocations I'd selected, the automatic rebalancing schedule we'd established, and the tax advantages of the particular 529 plans I'd chosen. "What Nancy has accomplished here is remarkable," Marcus told them, "especially considering her background isn't in finance." "I did a lot of research," I admitted, "and Marcus has been very patient in explaining options to me over the years." Melissa leaned forward, clearly engaged in the discussion. "What would you recommend for our family moving forward? Christopher and I have been contributing to separate 529 plans, but with much smaller amounts." Marcus outlined several options, including maintaining separate accounts but aligning investment strategies, consolidating into the existing accounts I'd established, or creating a new unified approach. Throughout the conversation, he addressed all three of us equally, recognizing our shared interest in the children's future. "The most important factor for successful education funding isn't actually which specific investment vehicles you choose," Marcus concluded. "It's consistency and communication between the adults involved. Families that plan together tend to achieve better outcomes." As we left the meeting, I expected to return to my car separately, but Melissa surprised me. "Do you have time for coffee? I'd like to continue our discussion." The nearby cafe was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. Once we had settled at a corner table with our drinks, Melissa got straight to the point. "I've been thinking about our situation a lot," she said, cupping her mug with both hands. "The financial planning is important, but it's made me realize something more fundamental that we need to address." I waited, giving her space to express her thoughts. "Emma and Noah deserve to have you in their lives," she continued. "Not just financially, but personally. Your presence adds something valuable that neither Christopher nor I can provide. The way you engage with Emma's scientific curiosity, the patience you show with Noah's artistic explorations, those are gifts that go beyond money." Her words touched me deeply. After months of conflict and careful reconciliation, this acknowledgement of my unique value to the children felt like a watershed moment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "They are such extraordinary children. Being part of their lives is a privilege I don't take for granted anymore." "I've been too rigid," Melissa admitted. "In trying to create structure and consistency, I sometimes forget that children also need spontaneity and different perspectives. The college funds you established showed me something important about you. Your capacity for long-term thinking and commitment, even when the relationship was strained. It was never about control," I assured her. "Just love, expressed in the way I best knew how." Melissa nodded thoughtfully. "I think we've been focused on the wrong question all along. Instead of asking who has authority over the children, we should be asking how each of us can contribute to their well-being in complementary ways." This shift in perspective struck me as profound. Rather than competing for primacy in the children's lives, we could recognize that each of us, Melissa, Christopher, and I, brought different strengths and resources that, together, created a richer environment for Emma and Noah to flourish. "I'd like to propose something," Melissa continued. "The supervised visits have gone well, and family therapy has been productive. I think we're ready to move toward more regular, unsupervised time for you with the children." My heart leapt, but I maintained a measured response. I would be grateful for that opportunity. "There would still be parameters," she clarified. "Consistent communication about plans, respecting bedtimes and dietary guidelines, coordinating activities with their overall schedule. But I think we've established enough trust to move forward." "I'm committed to honoring your parenting decisions," I assured her, "and to communicating openly about any concerns that arise." By the time we finished our coffee, we had outlined a new arrangement. I would have the children one weekend afternoon each week and one overnight visit monthly. We would continue family therapy but reduce the frequency to twice monthly rather than weekly. Most importantly, we established a communication protocol, direct, respectful conversation about issues rather than triangulation through Christopher. As our reconciliation progressed over the following months, I noticed subtle shifts in our family dynamic. Christopher became more engaged, no longer forced to act as mediator between his mother and wife. Melissa began to consult me occasionally on parenting challenges, recognizing that my experience as both a mother and an educator might offer useful perspectives. I learned to offer observations as gentle suggestions rather than corrections, always affirming her primary role in decision-making. The children flourished in this more harmonious environment. Emma's interest in science continued to grow, now encouraged by both Melissa and me in complementary ways. Melissa enrolled her in a rigorous STEM program at school, while I took her to museums and nature centers where she could experience hands-on exploration. Noah's artistic talents developed similarly, with Melissa providing structured art classes and I offering unconventional materials and techniques that encouraged creative experimentation. Nearly a year after our reconciliation process began, an unexpected situation arose that tested our new relationship. Melissa's firm assigned her to lead a major case that would require travel to their San Francisco office for 2 weeks. Christopher's business was in the midst of opening a new location, making it impossible for him to manage full-time childcare during her absence. In the past, Diana would have been the automatic choice to step in. But Diana and her husband had planned an anniversary cruise that coincided with Melissa's assignment. After some discussion, Melissa approached me directly. "Would you be willing to stay at our house while I'm away? The children would maintain their normal routine with school and activities, but you'd be there for mornings, evenings, and weekend care." The request represented a level of trust I hadn't dared hope for a year earlier. "I would be honored," I replied, careful not to appear too eager. "Are you sure you're comfortable with this arrangement?" "I am," she said with surprising certainty. "You've consistently respected our boundaries these past months. More importantly, the children adore you, and I know you'll provide the emotional support they need while I'm away." Those 2 weeks became a turning point in our relationship. I moved into their guest room temporarily, helping maintain the children's established routines while Christopher managed extended work hours. Each evening, Melissa video called to connect with the children, and I made sure they were prepared and available for these important check-ins. Rather than trying to replace Melissa during her absence, I positioned myself as the supporter of her continued presence. "Your mom wants to hear about your science project," I'd remind Emma before the call. "Make sure to tell her about the experiment. Results." With Noah, I'd help him prepare artwork to show her, celebrating his creativity while keeping Melissa connected to his development. When small issues arose, Emma's resistance to completing a challenging homework assignment, Noah's sudden refusal to eat vegetables he'd previously enjoyed, I handled them within the parameters Melissa had established, documenting my approaches, so she remained informed without feeling she needed to solve problems remotely. Upon Melissa's return, instead of rushing back to my own home, I stayed an extra day to help with the transition, preparing a detailed handover of the children's experiences during her absence. Rather than highlighting my successful management, I emphasized moments when the children had especially missed her, reaffirming her irreplaceable role in their lives. "You did an amazing job," Melissa said as we sat in the kitchen after the children were in bed. Christopher had stepped out to handle a business call, leaving us alone. Christopher says the household ran smoother than when his mother visits. "Diana has different strengths," I said diplomatically. Melissa laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that I realized I'd rarely heard from her. "Diana reorganized my kitchen cabinets last time she stayed. Said my system was illogical. I couldn't find the measuring cups for a week." I smiled, recognizing the familiar behavior. "She means well." "She does," Melissa acknowledged. "But she doesn't really see me. Or Christopher, for that matter. She sees reflections of her own expectations." She glanced at me thoughtfully. "You've learned to see us as we actually are." "It took me long enough," I admitted. "But yes, I've come to appreciate your family on its own terms, not as an extension of my relationship with Christopher." That's the difference, Melissa said softly. And that's why I trust you with the children now. You're not trying to make them into miniature versions of Christopher or yourself. You see them as individuals. That evening marked another milestone in our evolving relationship. The first time Melissa had explicitly articulated her trust in me, not just as a financial contributor to her children's future, but as a significant emotional presence in their lives. As the seasons changed, our family dynamic continued to evolve and strengthen. The carefully negotiated visitation schedule gradually gave way to more natural interactions. I became a regular presence at school events, occasionally picked the children up from activities when Melissa and Christopher were working, and hosted them for spontaneous visits when opportunities arose. The college funds, which had initially served as tangible proof of my commitment during our estrangement, became a shared project. Christopher and Melissa began making their own contributions, smaller than mine, but symbolically important. We met with Marcus annually to review investment performance and adjust strategies as needed, functioning as a unified team rather than separate parties. The most unexpected development in our reconciliation process was the gradual transformation in my relationship with Melissa herself. What had begun as carefully managed cooperation for the children's sake evolved into a genuine connection. We discovered shared interests beyond the children, a mutual love of historical fiction, similar views on social justice issues, a common frustration with institutional bureaucracy in our respective fields. On Emma's 9th birthday, I arrived early to help with party preparations. As we arranged decorations and prepared food, Melissa mentioned casually, "Diana called this morning. She's sending a gift but can't make it to the party. Apparently, there's a charity gala she's chairing that couldn't possibly proceed without her physical presence." There was a resigned quality to her voice that I recognized all too well, the familiar disappointment of a child whose parent consistently prioritized other commitments above family milestones. "Emma will be disappointed," I observed carefully. "She's used to it," Melissa replied, then caught herself. "That came out wrong. What I meant was..." "I understand," I assured her. "You grew up with similar experiences." Melissa glanced at me, surprised by my perception. "Yes, actually. My parents never missed anything that would reflect poorly on them socially. Award ceremonies, school performances where I had prominent roles. But birthday parties, regular soccer games, everyday moments, those weren't priority events." "That must have been painful," I said, continuing to arrange cupcakes on the display stand we'd created. "It was educational," she replied with practiced detachment. "I learned early that achievement earned attention. Ordinary existence didn't warrant it." The insight into Melissa's childhood helped explain aspects of her parenting that had once seemed overly demanding to me. Her emphasis on the children's accomplishments, her structured approach to their development, her concern with their presentation in public settings. "You're breaking that pattern with Emma and Noah," I observed. "You're present for both the extraordinary and the ordinary moments." Melissa looked startled, as if this perspective hadn't occurred to her. "I'm trying. Sometimes I worry I've internalized more of my parents' approach than I'd like to admit." "We all carry forward patterns from our upbringing," I said. "But awareness is the first step toward change, and you're far more attentive to the children's emotional needs than you give yourself credit for." She regarded me with open curiosity now. "How did you do it? Raise Christopher on your own while working full-time, without family support? Without missing important moments?" "Oh, I missed plenty," I admitted with a soft laugh. "There was a science fair presentation when Christopher was in 4th grade. I had to work a double shift at the library because another staff member was sick. I still feel guilty about that one. But overall, you were present for him." "I prioritized it above almost everything else," I acknowledged. "Sometimes to my own detriment. I turned down promotions that would have required evening hours, limited my social life significantly, lived in a smaller apartment than we might have, needed so we could remain in a good school district. Those are substantial sacrifices. I considered this. They didn't feel like sacrifices at the time, just choices aligned with what mattered most to me. Melissa was quiet for a moment, arranging party favors with methodical precision. I struggle with that balance, she finally admitted. The partnership track at my firm rewards complete dedication. There's an unspoken expectation that family obligations are secondary. That's a difficult position to navigate, I acknowledged, recognizing the vulnerability it took for her to share this conflict with me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making the right choices, she continued. If the children will remember the cases I won or the moments I missed. Children remember the quality of attention more than the quantity, I offered gently. You're fully present when you're with them. That matters more than being physically present for every moment. Melissa looked unconvinced. That's a comforting perspective, but I'm not sure it's true. My parents use similar reasoning to justify their absences. The difference is that you're genuinely conflicted about it, I pointed out. Your concern shows that you're already approaching parenthood differently than they did. Our conversation was interrupted by Christopher bringing in the birthday cake, but something had shifted between us. For the first time, Melissa had shared a vulnerability about her parenting rather than projecting certainty. And I had responded not as a competing authority figure, but as someone who understood the impossible balancing acts that parenthood requires. The party was a success. 15 energetic third graders exploring space-themed activities in the backyard, Emma beaming as she opened gifts and blew out candles. I stayed afterward to help clean up, working alongside Melissa in comfortable silence as Christopher entertained the children with a movie. As I was preparing to leave, Melissa handed me a small gift bag. "This is for you," she said, an unusual hesitance in her manner. "Just a small token of appreciation for all your help, today." Inside was a delicate silver frame containing a photo of Emma, Noah, and me from our recent trip to the botanical gardens. The children were laughing, flowers blooming around us, my expression one of complete joy. "Christopher took this without you noticing," Melissa explained. "I thought you might like to have it." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, noticing a DI, beautiful moment, preserving it, presenting it as a gift, touched me deeply. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing she would understand the depth of feeling behind those inadequate words. 2 months after Emma's birthday, Melissa faced a significant professional challenge. Her firm assigned her to lead a high-profile environmental lawsuit against a powerful corporation, an enormous opportunity that would virtually guarantee her partnership if successful. The case would demand intensive preparation, long hours, and potentially travel for depositions and court appearances. Rather than making this decision unilaterally, Melissa initiated a family meeting, including Christopher, the children, and surprisingly, me. She explained the opportunity and its demands clearly, discussing how it would affect family routines and availability. "This is an important case that could help protect natural resources for communities like ours," she told Emma and Noah, neither minimizing the significance of the work nor using it as an excuse for absence. "But it will mean I'll need to work longer hours for the next few months. I want us to talk about how we'll manage that together." I was impressed by her transparency, the way she included the children in problem-solving rather than simply informing them of changes. Emma, ever practical, immediately began suggesting schedule adjustments. Noah was quieter, eventually asking the question that revealed his underlying concern. "Will you still come to my art show next month?" "Absolutely," Melissa assured him. "Some things will need to shift, but important events like your art show are non-negotiable. I'll be there." After discussing various adjustments to household routines, Melissa turned to me. "Nancy, we were hoping you might be willing to take a more active role during this period. Perhaps an additional afternoon each week with the children, or occasional overnight stays when I have early morning depositions." The request acknowledged me as an essential support person in their family system, not a replacement for Melissa, but a trusted adult who could provide continuity and care during a challenging time. "I'd be happy to help however I can," I replied, deeply moved by her willingness to include me in this significant family adjustment. Christopher spoke up then. "I've also arranged to adjust my schedule at the cafes. I'll be working more remotely to be home when the kids get back from school on the days Nancy isn't available." What struck me most about this meeting was the collaborative approach. Rather than Melissa sacrificing her career opportunity or Christopher and I scrambling to cover her absence, we were functioning as an extended family unit, each contributing to support both the children's needs and Melissa's professional growth. Over the following months, our arrangements evolved organically. There were challenging days, Melissa working late into evenings, Christopher juggling business crises while managing homework supervision, me stepping in when both parents were stretched thin. But throughout this period, communication remained open and respectful. One Tuesday evening, I arrived at their home to find Melissa still at the dining room table surrounded by legal documents, looking exhausted. The children had already eaten dinner, and Christopher was helping Noah with a bath while Emma worked on a science project in her room. "Can I get you anything?" I offered, setting down my bag. "You look like you could use some tea." Melissa glanced up, momentarily disoriented. "Nancy, I'm sorry. I completely lost track of time. You're here for the children's homework supervision." "I am, but they seem well in hand at the moment. Let me make you some tea before I check on Emma." I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle and selecting a chamomile blend from their tea collection. When I returned with the steaming mug, Melissa had cleared a small space among her papers, rubbing her temples wearily. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tea gratefully. "This case is more demanding than I anticipated. The corporation has 5 attorneys to our 2, and their resources are seemingly limitless." "But they don't have you," I observed, sitting across from her. Christopher mentioned the preliminary hearing went well. A small smile touched her lips. "The judge denied their motion to dismiss. That's a significant victory at this stage." She took a sip of tea. "I should check on the children." "They're fine," I assured her. "Christopher has Noah in the bath, and Emma is working on her ecosystem diorama. Why don't you take 15 minutes to just breathe? You've earned it." Melissa looked momentarily resistant, then her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Maybe you're right, just 15 minutes." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, Melissa sipping her tea while I glanced through a magazine left on the table. Then she spoke again, her voice softer than usual. "I never thanked you properly. For the tea? It's just chamomile." "No," she said, setting down her mug. "For the college funds. For continuing to contribute even when you weren't seeing the children. For thinking about their future when the present was so difficult." I was surprised by this sudden return to a topic we hadn't specifically discussed in months. "You did. Thank me. At the financial planning meeting." Melissa shook her head slightly. "That was acknowledging the practical aspect. I'm talking about what it represents. Consistency, long-term commitment, putting their needs above your feelings about the situation." She looked directly at me now. "Those are qualities I value enormously. They're qualities I see in you, too," I replied honestly. "The way you're managing this case while still prioritizing the children's important moments. The effort you've made in rebuilding our relationship despite the difficult history." A comfortable silence fell between us again, different from the careful politeness of our early reconciliation or the tense standoffs of our previous conflict. This was the quiet of mutual understanding, of recognition between 2 women who had moved from adversaries to allies in the shared project of nurturing 2 extraordinary children. "I should probably check on Emma's project," I said eventually, rising from the table. "She mentioned needing help with the rainforest canopy layer." Melissa nodded. "Thank you, Nancy, for the tea and everything else." As I headed toward Emma's room, I reflected on how profoundly our relationship had evolved. The legal barriers that had once separated me from my grandchildren had given way to a new kind of connection. Not just with Emma and Noah, but with Melissa herself. The college funds that I had established as private expressions of love had become symbols of a deeper commitment, recognized and valued by the very person who had once seen me as a threat to her family's stability. 2 weeks later, Melissa faced a crucial deposition in the environmental case. It was scheduled for 7 a.m., requiring her to leave home by 5:30 a.m. to prepare with her co-counsel. Christopher had an early supplier meeting he couldn't reschedule. Without discussion, I stayed overnight to ensure the children would have a smooth morning routine. As I was preparing breakfast, Emma wandered into the kitchen still in her pajamas, her curly hair tousled from sleep. "Grandma Nancy, is today Mom's big lawyer day?" "Yes, sweetheart. She's questioning some important witnesses for her case." Emma nodded solemnly. "She was practicing questions last night. I heard her in the office." She climbed onto a stool at the counter. "Do you think she's nervous?" The question surprised me. Emma usually focused on concrete details rather than emotional states. "I think she probably is a little nervous. Important work often makes people nervous, even when they're very good at what they do. Like when I had to present my science project to the whole school," Emma reasoned. My stomach felt weird, but Mom said that was just my body getting ready to do something important. "Your mother is exactly right," I confirmed, placing a bowl of oatmeal in front of her. "It's called productive anxiety. It helps us focus when something matters." Emma considered this while carefully arranging blueberries on top of her oatmeal. "I made Mom something for her big day, but I forgot to give it to her before she left." "What did you make?" I asked, curious about this thoughtful gesture. Emma slid off her stool. "Wait here." She ran back to her room, returning moments later with a carefully folded piece of paper. "It's a good luck card. Do you think we could take it to her before her important meeting?" I checked the time. The courthouse was downtown, a 20-minute drive in morning traffic. If we hurried, we might catch Melissa before the deposition began, but it would mean disrupting the morning routine we'd established. In the past, I might have prioritized maintaining the schedule Melissa had outlined, fearful that any deviation would be interpreted as disregard for her parenting guidelines. But our relationship had evolved beyond that rigid framework. This moment called for flexibility in service of a meaningful connection between mother and daughter. "Let's do it," I decided. "We'll need to move quickly. Can you get Noah up and help him find clean clothes while I pack a breakfast you both can eat in the car?" Emma's face lit up. "We're really going? To the courthouse?" "Yes, but there are conditions." "You'll both need to be on your absolute best behavior. A courthouse is a serious place where important work happens, and we'll need to be very quick. Just delivery of your card, then straight to school." "I understand," Emma nodded solemnly. "I'll tell Noah he needs to use his library voice." 20 minutes later, we were in my car heading downtown, both children dressed and buckled in, eating toaster waffles wrapped in napkins. I'd texted Christopher to inform him of our change in plans, receiving an immediate thumbs up in response. The courthouse was an imposing stone building with massive columns at the entrance. I found parking nearby and helped the children out of the car, straightening Noah's slightly crooked collar and reminding them both about appropriate behavior. "Remember, we're just delivering Emma's card to your mom, then heading straight to school. We don't want to disrupt her important work." The security checkpoint inside the main entrance was intimidating, but the officer smiled at the children as he explained the scanning process. "You folks know where you're heading?" he asked kindly. "Environmental case deposition," I explained. "Chambers 304, Attorney Melissa Parker." He nodded. "4th floor, turn right out of the elevator. They should be in the conference room at the end of the hall. Deposition doesn't start for another 15 minutes, so you've got good timing." Following his directions, we found ourselves in a quiet hallway lined with imposing wooden doors. At the far end, a small group of people stood outside a conference room, several in formal legal attire. Melissa was among them, engaged in intense conversation with an older man I assumed was her co-counsel. "Mom!" Emma called out, her attempt at a whisper carrying down the marble hallway. Melissa turned, her professional composure momentarily giving way to naked surprise. "Emma? Noah? What are you doing here?" As the children approached, I hung back slightly, suddenly uncertain about my decision to bring them. Had I overstepped? Disrupted her professional concentration before a crucial deposition? Emma reached her mother, holding out the folded card. "I made this for your big lawyer day, but I forgot to give it to you this morning. Grandma Nancy helped us bring it." Melissa knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the card with visible emotion. She opened it carefully, revealing a colorful drawing of herself in what appeared to be a superhero cape, standing before a judge's bench. Above the drawing, Emma had written in her careful third-grade printing, "Good luck, Mom. You are going to save the forest and win your case because you are smart and brave." "Oh, Emma," Melissa said softly, pulling her daughter into a hug. "This is exactly what I needed today. Thank you." Noah moved forward then, not wanting to be left out. "We had to go through a metal detector," he informed his mother importantly, "and eat waffles in the car." Melissa laughed, including him in the embrace. "What an adventure. I'm so glad you came." She looked up then, meeting my eyes over the children's heads. Her expression held no reproach, only gratitude. "We should let your mom get back to work," I said gently to the children. "She has important people to question." Melissa stood, smoothing her suit jacket, the card still in her hand. "I'm going to keep this right next to me during the deposition," she told Emma. "It will remind me why this case matters." She walked us back toward the elevator, her hand on Noah's shoulder. As the children pressed the elevator button, she turned to me, speaking quietly. "Thank you for this. It was exactly what I needed." "Emma's idea," I demurred. "I just provided transportation." "But you recognize the importance of the moment," Melissa observed. "You understood that sometimes connection matters more than routine." The elevator arrived, and the children stepped inside eagerly. Before joining them, I shared a final thought with Melissa. That's what the college funds were always about. You know, not just money for tuition someday, but recognition of all the moments, big and small, that would shape them into the people they'll become. I wanted to be part of that journey, even from a distance if necessary. Melissa nodded, understanding the deeper significance. "You are part of it now, an essential part." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back." "Go save the forest," I smiled. "We've got the morning routine covered." As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Melissa returning to her colleagues, Emma's card held carefully in her hand, a talisman of love and confidence, as she prepared to advocate for environmental justice. That evening, when Melissa returned home, she brought news that her team had secured a significant procedural victory. The judge had ruled in their favor on a key evidentiary matter that would substantially strengthen their case. The children celebrated this abstract legal win as enthusiastically as if it were a soccer championship, understanding from their mother's explanation that it represented progress toward protecting important natural resources. After the children were in bed, Melissa, Christopher, and I sat in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine to celebrate the legal victory. The conversation flowed easily between case details, updates on the children's activities, and Christopher's latest business developments. "I've been thinking," Melissa said during a lull, swirling the wine in her glass thoughtfully, "about our financial planning for the children." Christopher and I both looked at her with interest. "The college funds are solid and growing well," she continued. "But, After today's experience at the courthouse, I'm wondering if we should consider something more immediate as well." "What did you have in mind?" Christopher asked. "Emma and Noah are developing such specific interests," Melissa explained. "Emma's passion for environmental science and Noah's artistic talents. What if we created separate funds designated specifically for enrichment activities in those areas? Not just for college someday, but for meaningful experiences now. Specialized. Summer camps, advanced classes, perhaps even travel opportunities as they get older." The suggestion revealed how much Melissa had evolved in her thinking about the children's development. Rather than focusing exclusively on academic achievement and future credentials, she was recognizing the value of nurturing their unique passions through experiential learning. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I responded, genuinely impressed by her insight. Children learn so much from immersive experiences that align with their natural interests. Christopher nodded enthusiastically. "We could structure it similarly to the college accounts, regular contributions from all of us, but with more immediate accessibility for appropriate opportunities." "Exactly," Melissa agreed. "And Nancy, I'd value your input on selecting these experiences. Your background in education gives you perspective on what might be most beneficial at different developmental stages." This invitation to participate in planning the children's enrichment activities represented another significant shift in our relationship. Melissa wasn't merely tolerating my presence or accepting my financial contributions, she was actively seeking my expertise and involvement in shaping Emma and Noah's development. "I'd be honored," I said simply, understanding the trust this request represented. We spent the next hour brainstorming possibilities. A marine biology camp in California that might appeal to Emma, a renowned arts program in the city that offered scholarships Noah could apply for, potential family trips to national parks that would combine outdoor adventure with environmental education. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, Melissa walked me to the door. "Thank you again for this morning," she said quietly. Seeing the children before that deposition centered me in a way nothing else could have. "They were so proud to support you," I replied. "Especially Emma. She's watching everything you do, absorbing lessons about being a professional woman, standing up for important causes, balancing family and meaningful work." Melissa's expression softened. "Sometimes I worry about the messages I'm sending her with my long hours and divided attention. The message she's receiving is that women can do significant work in the world while still loving their families deeply," I assured her. "That's a powerful legacy, Melissa." She considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're right. I certainly never saw that modeled in my own childhood." "You're creating a new pattern for your children," I observed, "just as you're helping create new legal precedents through your environmental work." A small smile touched Melissa's lips. I hadn't thought of it that way. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the remarkable journey our family had traveled. From the devastating cease and desist letter that had formalized my separation from my grandchildren to this evening of collaborative planning for their future, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it hadn't happened through any single dramatic moment, but through countless small choices, difficult conversations, and gradual rebuilding of trust. The college funds that had once represented my private commitment to Emma and Noah's future had evolved into something more meaningful, tangible symbols of our family's shared values and collective responsibility for nurturing the next generation. What began as financial accounts had become bridges connecting different aspects of the children's lives, their present explorations and future possibilities, their mother's professional principles and their grandmother's educational insights. 2 months later, the environmental case that had consumed so much of Melissa's time and energy reached a significant milestone. The corporation, facing mounting evidence of regulatory violations and growing public scrutiny, approached Melissa's team about a potential settlement. The terms were substantial: full remediation of the affected watersheds, establishment of an environmental monitoring program, and creation of a substantial community benefit fund for areas impacted by pollution. Melissa was directly involved in negotiating these terms, insisting on specific performance benchmarks and independent oversight mechanisms. When the settlement was finally announced, it represented not just a legal victory, but a meaningful improvement in environmental protection for the region. The evening after the settlement was finalized, Melissa arrived home earlier than usual, bringing a small cake to celebrate with the family. As we gathered around the dining table, she described the settlement in terms the children could understand. "The company has agreed to clean up the river and make sure it stays clean," she explained. "They're also creating a special fund to help communities that were affected by the pollution. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a significant step forward." Emma, now 9 and increasingly aware of environmental issues, had followed the case with interest. "Did they say sorry for polluting the water?" she asked earnestly. Melissa smiled at her daughter's straightforward moral framework. "Not in those exact words, but they've committed to doing better in the future and repairing the damage they caused. Sometimes in law, actions speak louder than apologies." Noah, less interested in legal nuances but always supportive of his mother, had drawn a special picture for the occasion. Melissa depicted as a defender of forests and rivers, complete with a flowing cape. His artistic skills were developing, impressively, showing remarkable attention to detail for a 7-year-old. "This deserves a place of honor," Melissa declared, immediately taking the drawing to her home office and pinning it prominently on the bulletin board. Noah beamed with pride at this acknowledgement of his contribution. As we enjoyed the celebratory cake, Christopher raised his glass in a toast. "To Melissa, environmental defender and extraordinary mother, who shows us every day that principles and passion can change the world." The children clinked their juice glasses enthusiastically, and I joined the toast with genuine admiration. Watching Melissa blush slightly at this recognition, I was struck by how fully she had integrated the different aspects of her identity: the brilliant attorney and the devoted mother, roles that had once seemed in conflict, now reinforcing each other. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Melissa, Christopher, and I sat in the backyard enjoying the spring evening. The conversation turned to the enrichment funds we had established for Emma and Noah, which were growing steadily through our combined monthly contributions. "I've been researching summer programs," Melissa said, pulling out her tablet to share the information she'd gathered. "There's a junior naturalist program at the national park that would be perfect for Emma. 2 weeks of hands-on field research, mentorship from actual scientists, and a community service component. She would absolutely thrive in that environment." I agreed, reviewing the program details, and it aligns perfectly with her interest in watershed ecology. "It's competitive," Melissa noted. "She would need to submit an application with an essay about why she's interested in environmental conservation." "That's actually beneficial," I observed. "The application process itself is educational, learning to articulate her interests and goals." Christopher had been researching options for Noah as well. "There's an art institute downtown that offers a multimedia exploration program for his age group. It incorporates different techniques, painting, sculpture, digital design, to help young artists discover their preferred mediums." We discussed these opportunities at length, weighing factors like appropriate challenge levels, quality of instruction, and alignment with each child's specific interests. What struck me most about this conversation was its collaborative nature. There was no competition between parents and grandmother, no rigid hierarchy of decision-making authority, just 3 adults sharing expertise and perspectives to benefit the children we all loved. The following weekend brought Emma's school science fair, an event she had been preparing for with characteristic intensity. Her project examined microbial diversity in water samples collected from different parts of the local creek system, comparing areas with varying levels of human activity. Christopher had helped with the technical aspects of using the microscope properly, Melissa had assisted with the research methodology, and I had worked with Emma on creating clear, visually appealing presentation materials. The project represented our collaborative approach to supporting her development, each of us contributing different skills and knowledge. The morning of the science fair, as we helped Emma transport her display boards and sample containers to the school gymnasium, I noticed a subtle change in family dynamics. Rather than the anxious coordination and unspoken tensions that might once have characterized such an event, there was a relaxed efficiency to our preparations. Christopher handled the logistics of moving equipment. Melissa reviewed Emma's presentation, points one final time, and I made sure Noah was engaged and included, despite this being his sister's moment in the spotlight. As other families arrived and began setting up their displays, Diana and Robert Thompson, Melissa's parents, appeared unexpectedly. Their presence at a routine school event, rather than just major milestones, was unusual, and I felt a momentary tension. Would my role be diminished now that the official grandparents had arrived? Melissa seemed equally surprised by her parents' appearance. "Mom, Dad, I didn't realize you were coming." Diana, impeccably dressed as always, kissed her daughter's cheek. "We rearranged some appointments. Robert thought Emma's project sounded quite impressive when you mentioned it last week." Emma approached her maternal grandparents with polite affection, clearly pleased by their interest but not showing the uninhibited enthusiasm she typically displayed with me. "I collected water samples from 5 different locations," she explained, leading them toward her display. I hung back, uncertain of my place in this reconfigured family scene. Diana had always been cordial to me at larger family gatherings, but we had rarely navigated more intimate settings together. To my surprise, Melissa noticed my hesitation and deliberately created space for me. "Mom, Dad, you remember Nancy," she said, drawing me forward. She was instrumental in helping Emma prepare her presentation materials. Her background in educational resources was invaluable. Diana extended her hand with practiced social grace. "Nancy, lovely to see you. The display is quite professional." "Emma did the substantive work," I replied modestly. "I just helped with layout and visual organization." Robert Thompson, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and sharp eyes, studied me with new interest. "Melissa mentioned you've been quite involved with the children's educational activities. We appreciate your support of our granddaughter's scientific interests." The acknowledgement, though formal, represented a significant shift. In the past, Diana and Robert had barely acknowledged my role in their grandchildren's lives. Now, Melissa was explicitly positioning me as a valuable contributor to Emma's development. As the science fair progressed, I observed the different ways we each supported Emma. Diana asked pointed questions about the scientific implications of her findings. Robert discussed potential applications of her research methodology, and Christopher captured photographs of key moments. I helped Noah engage with his sister's project at an appropriate level for his age, while Melissa stood back, allowing Emma to present her work independently but remaining visibly present for moral support. When Emma received a blue ribbon for her category, our collective celebration transcended the previous boundaries and hierarchies that had separated us. She was surrounded by 5 adults who valued her achievement in different but complementary ways, all essential threads in the complex tapestry of support that would nurture her growth. At the celebratory lunch afterward, Diana surprised me by taking the seat beside mine. "Melissa tells me you've established significant college funds for both children," she said without preamble. I nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Yes, I've been contributing since they were born." "That's remarkably foresighted," Diana observed. "Robert and I have set up trust funds for them as well, but they're structured to be accessible when they're older, 25 actually. We believe in ensuring financial responsibility before providing substantial assets." Rather than feeling defensive about our different approaches, I recognized this as Diana's attempt at financial dialogue. The college funds are specifically education-focused, I explained. We've also established enrichment accounts for more immediate opportunities aligned with their interests. Diana looked intrigued. Enrichment accounts? That's an interesting concept. What sort of opportunities are you considering? As I described the summer programs we were researching and our philosophy of nurturing the children's specific passions, Diana listened with genuine attention. She eventually offered, Robert serves on the board of the Regional Arts Foundation. They have a mentorship program for talented young artists that might interest Noah in a few years. I could inquire about age requirements. This unexpected collaboration, Diana offering to use her connections to benefit Noah's artistic development, represented yet another expansion of our family system. The very social capital that had once intimidated me was now being offered as a resource for my grandson's growth. By the time we finished lunch, something subtle but significant had shifted in my relationship with the Thompsons. We weren't friends. Exactly. But we had begun to recognize each other as different types of resources in the children's lives, each bringing valuable but distinct contributions to their development. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed still glowing from her science fair success, Melissa and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. Christopher had taken Noah out for ice cream as a special treat for being such a supportive brother throughout the day. "Thank you for how you handled my parents today," Melissa said, loading the last of the dinner dishes into the dishwasher. "I know they can be challenging." "They were perfectly cordial," I replied diplomatically. Melissa laughed softly. "Yes, they excel at public cordiality. But I noticed how you engaged with my mother's questions without becoming defensive or competitive. That's not easy to do with Diana." "We're different types of grandparents," I acknowledged. "But that's actually beneficial for Emma and Noah. They get different perspectives, different forms of support." Melissa leaned against the counter, studying me thoughtfully. "When I was growing up, my mother's entire identity was wrapped up in social status and appearance. Her parenting focused on making sure I reflected well on the family, proper behavior, academic achievement, appropriate social connections." "That must have been difficult," I offered. She nodded. "It was. There was constant pressure to perform, to meet expectations. What I never felt was simply seen for who I was. My actual interests and feelings were secondary to how I presented to the world." The vulnerability in this admission struck me deeply. Melissa rarely spoke about her childhood experiences with such raw honesty. "What I observe in your relationship with Emma and Noah is something entirely different," she continued. "You see them, their authentic selves, their specific passions and quirks. You respond to who they actually are, not who you think they should be, or how they might reflect on you." "Isn't that what grandparenting should be?" I asked softly. "Witnessing who they are becoming and supporting that journey?" "It should be," Melissa agreed, "but it's rarer than you might think. My parents love the children, but they still see them primarily as extensions of the family legacy, vessels for their expectations." I considered this thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the gift of your generation of parenting, creating space for children to become their authentic selves while still providing guidance and structure. "I'm trying," Melissa admitted, "though I sometimes fall into the patterns I learned from my parents. The rigid schedules, the emphasis on achievement, those aren't entirely separate from how I was raised. But your awareness makes all the difference," I pointed out. "You question those patterns, adapt them, soften them when needed." Melissa smiled slightly. "Like when you brought the children to the courthouse with Emma's good luck card. A year ago, I would have seen that as a disruption of the carefully planned routine. Instead, it became one of the most meaningful moments of that case." This acknowledgement of her own growth touched me deeply. Melissa was recognizing not just my contributions to the children's lives, but her own evolution as a parent and professional. "The college funds," she said, returning to a theme that had become symbolic of our reconciliation journey. "They've made me think differently about legacy. Not just financial provision, but the different kinds of wealth we pass to the next generation." "What kinds of wealth are you thinking about?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "Educational wealth, certainly. The opportunities and advantages that financial resources can provide," she began. "But also emotional wealth, the security of knowing you're deeply loved for who you are, not what you achieve. And what I might call legacy wealth, connection to values and principles that transcend individual lives." "Like your environmental work," I observed. "You're showing Emma that protecting natural resources matters enough to dedicate your professional talents to it. And your consistent presence in their lives," Melissa added, "demonstrates that relationships endure even through difficult periods, that love persists beyond conflicts." The depth of this conversation, two women reflecting on the nature of legacy and the different dimensions of wealth we hope to transmit to the next generation, would have been unimaginable during our period of estrangement. Yet here we were, building a shared understanding of what truly mattered in raising these remarkable children. As summer approached, Emma's application to the Junior Naturalist program was accepted, generating tremendous excitement in the household. Noah, not to be outdone, enthusiastically enrolled in the multimedia art program Christopher had identified. The enrichment funds we had established were fulfilling exactly the purpose we had envisioned, providing meaningful experiences aligned with each child's specific interests and talents. To everyone's surprise, Diana and Robert invited the entire family, including me, to their lake house for the 4th of July weekend. This unprecedented inclusion signaled another evolution in our extended family system, an acknowledgement that the children benefited from having all their grandparents present for significant family gatherings. The weekend at the lake house could have been fraught with tension. Different parenting philosophies, historical grievances, competing attachments to the children. Instead, it became a living demonstration of how our varied perspectives and resources could create a richer experience for Emma and Noah. Diana organized a formal dinner with appropriate holiday decorations. Robert took the children sailing on his small boat. Christopher managed a spectacular fireworks viewing. Melissa ensured everyone had sufficient downtime among the activities, and I created a nature scavenger hunt that engaged the children in exploring the lake ecosystem. Rather than competing for primacy, we each contributed different elements to a memorable family experience. On the final evening at the lake house, as the adults gathered on the deck after the children were asleep, Robert raised an unexpected topic. "Melissa mentioned the educational enrichment accounts you've established for the children," he said, addressing all of us. "Diana and I have been discussing how we might contribute more immediately to their development rather than just through the long-term trusts." Diana nodded. "We've been impressed by Emma and Noah's specific interests and talents. Perhaps there's a way to coordinate our financial planning to support these developing passions more effectively." This openness to collaboration from Melissa's parents represented yet another surprising evolution in our family dynamics. Rather than maintaining separate and potentially competing financial provisions for the children, they were suggesting a more unified approach. "We could schedule a joint meeting with our financial advisors," Christopher suggested. "Create a comprehensive strategy that incorporates everyone's contributions in complementary ways." As we discussed this possibility, I marveled at how completely our family narrative had transformed. What began with my solitary contributions to college funds, private expressions of love during a period of estrangement, had evolved into a collaborative approach to nurturing Emma and Noah's development, bringing together financial resources, social connections, educational expertise, and varied perspectives on what constituted meaningful opportunity. The summer unfolded with rich experiences for both children. Emma's 2 weeks at the Junior Naturalist program deepened her environmental consciousness. while Noah's art classes helped him discover a particular affinity for sculpture and three-dimensional forms. The enrichment funds provided access to these opportunities, but the greater wealth lay in the collaborative support system that had developed around them, multiple adults contributing different resources and perspectives to nurture their growth. As I watched Emma explaining watershed ecology concepts she had learned, or Noah describing his artistic process for creating textural variations in clay, I felt profound gratitude for the journey our family had traveled. The cease and desist letter that had once formalized my separation from these remarkable children now seemed like an artifact from another lifetime. A painful chapter that had ultimately led to a deeper, more authentic connection, not just with my grandchildren, but with their mother as well. One evening in late August, as summer drew to a close, I joined Melissa, Christopher, and the children for dinner in their backyard. The garden was in full bloom, the air warm and fragrant with jasmine. Emma was excitedly describing her plans. For next summer, she hoped to apply for an advanced environmental program building on the skills she'd developed this year. Noah was sharing ideas for an art project inspired by natural forms he'd observed during our family time at the lake house. As twilight deepened and fireflies began to appear, Melissa brought out a small cake with a single candle. "This isn't anyone's birthday," she explained as the children looked confused. "It's an anniversary of sorts, exactly 1 year since we began rebuilding our family relationships through therapy." I was touched by this acknowledgement of our reconciliation journey, the conscious marking of how far we had come from the painful estrangement of the previous year. "I thought we should take a moment to appreciate the work we've all done to create this new family system," Melissa continued. "It hasn't always been easy, but it has been entirely worthwhile." Christopher nodded in agreement. "We've all had to examine our own patterns, let go of rigid positions, and learn new ways of communicating. That kind of growth deserves celebration." Emma, ever practical, had a question. Who gets to blow out the candle if it's not a birthday? Melissa smiled at her daughter. "I thought we might do it together, all of us making a wish for our family's future." As we gathered around the small flame, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable transformation we had experienced. The college funds that had begun as my solitary expression of love during separation had become symbols of a much deeper commitment, not just financial investment in the children's future, but emotional investment in creating a cohesive family system that honored different perspectives and contributions. The flame flickered in the gentle evening breeze as we leaned forward together, Melissa, Christopher, Emma, Noah, and I, a visual representation of the collaborative spirit that now defined our family. In unison, we blew out the candle, each holding private wishes for the journey ahead. As the children cheered and Melissa began cutting the cake, I caught her eye across the table. She smiled warmly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between recognition of the difficult path we had traveled and appreciation for the precious understanding we had built along the way. What had begun with a devastating cease and desist letter had transformed into one of the most meaningful relationships of my life. The financial legacy I had quietly established for my grandchildren had ultimately facilitated something far more valuable. A family system where different perspectives were respected, various types of resources were shared, and the children benefited from a rich network of support for their developing interests and identities. The college funds continued to grow, ensuring Emma and Noah would have educational opportunities when they reached adulthood. But the more immediate wealth lay in the family we had rebuilt, stronger for having been broken, more intentional for having confronted our conflicts, and infinitely richer for embracing the diverse contributions each of us brought to nurturing these extraordinary children. As Noah's laughter rang out, and Emma launched into another detailed explanation of watershed protection, I savored the simple joy of this family evening. The legal barriers that had once separated me from my grandchildren had given way to genuine connection, not just with Emma and Noah, but with Melissa herself. Together, we had discovered that the most valuable legacy we could provide wasn't measured in financial accounts or educational credentials, but in the quality of attention, the consistency of love, and the collaborative support we offered as they grew into their unique potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.